I'm very pleased to be joined by Paul Hodgins from Ginger, and he's going to tell us all about that. But we're going to have a conversation really about urban transport and the developments that are taking place, perhaps touch upon smart cities, this common phrase that we hear nowadays, and learn really about how cities are going to develop in the next few years. So welcome to the Downtown Den. You're our third or fourth person from a London perspective. Very pleased to have you with us, Paul.
Thank you very much. Really happy to be here. I hope everybody's keeping safe and healthy as much as they can at this time. But it's good to be discussing some important issues going forward about things that we're going to be coming out of this time for. So thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And just by way of background, you're going to tell us about Ginger in a moment. You're the CEO there, but you've also been the leader of, and you're still a councillor, but you've been the leader of Richmond, London Borough of Richmond, local authority, and you've got a background very much in telecoms in the UK.
Yeah, exactly. So I've been in telecoms and consumer electronics and the internet for I suppose over 20 years now. But I've been a local councillor at various different positions for 14 years. Right. So I have a good perspective of all the challenges that local councils are facing. Normal times with transport and the options, but everything about air quality and climate change and development and all of these kinds of things, where so much of it comes back to the challenges of transport in our city.
Yeah, and Ginger's all about transport, isn't it? Tell us about that. But it's about urban transport, micro-electric transport.
Yeah, so Ginger is a UK provider of shared microelectric transport, which at the moment is a fancy way of saying e-cargo bikes, e-bikes, and e-scooters, which have been getting a lot of attention recently. But really, for us, it's not about one vehicle type. It's about the mix. And the really exciting part about transport at the moment is there's just a huge amount of innovation that is happening. But it's our belief that in our cities, that with as I say, with everything happening around climate change, with air quality, with growth, with congestion in our cities, the big problem comes back to the use of cars and vans, and there are a couple of issues with cars and vans. One is of course the emissions themselves, and whether that be petrol or diesel, and we're all in favor of let's change over to electric vehicles. And hydrogen vehicles and anything else that comes along. But there's also an issue about size and efficiency and usage of our road spaces with vehicles. So in our cities, 60% of car journeys are with one person in the car. Another 25% are with two people in the car. Most journeys are less than 10 miles, and the majority of journeys are less than 5 miles. And yet we're using these big vehicles, whether it be for personal use or for business use, that just take up a lot of space. And even if the propulsion of them is much cleaner, they're still a very inefficient way to get around. So we think that the future of of transport in our cities is a combination of public transport, and there's a lot of very positive investment and very positive advancements in public transport that's happening at the moment. But public transport can't solve every route of where people want to get to. I mean, even in London, where we're very spoiled for bus routes, for example, and public transport, it's all great if you're going into the center of the city, but it's quite hard if you're trying to get around, and across the boroughs, especially in the outer part of London, and that's something that cities will face. And even with all of the investment that's going to go into rail, and it's fantastic that there's going to be a huge amount of investment, particularly up north with rail. you still need to get to the stations, and you still need to get people getting, within that kind of last few miles from them. And you don't want them to get in their cars. So we think that with all of the technical innovation that's happening, and these very new, exciting new vehicles that are coming, and there's going to be a lot more. It's not all about e-scooters and e-cargo bikes and that kind of thing. A lot of great innovation. But we think the future is going to be about small vehicles, small and micro vehicles. And it's just a better way to get around. People love getting around that way. It's just a much more efficient and, in fact, a much more cost-effective way to get around. So Ginger is about trying to get going, trying to solve these real transport issues with smaller vehicles, but also be taking advantage of the shared economy, which of course, coming out of our crisis at the moment, there are going to be a number of considerations, both positive and negative, about that shared economy that we're going to have to be looking at. But shared small vehicle transport, whether it's manual bike, assisted, as in an e-bike, or fully electric, as in an electric scooter or other emerging things, is where we think the really exciting, short distance urban transport innovation is going to be. But it's not all about just chuck a bunch of vehicles down and on the ground in the city and in the center of the city, and just sort of cater for the tourist market or the occasional users. Where what we really want to focus on is how do you use this new technology, these new vehicles, to solve real transport issues for local residents and for workers coming into an area. So how do I use it on a daily basis in a cost-effective way that just makes it very convenient, better to get around? And that's where the challenge is at the moment. It's not the technology, it's how you implement it within your city street scene, working with local councils, etc. And that's what we're about.
That's really interesting. And where is Ginger at? It's relatively new. You've got to focus across the UK, not just on London, and we'll come back to London specifically.
Yeah. So we've been going for over almost 2 years now. And so, as a new company, that's been about getting our platform all up and ready, and our vehicles, and all of that is ready to go. We're in about 10 locations across the UK with our scooters. And because of the state of the law at the moment, the UK is behind almost everywhere else. But that gives us some advantages, which we can talk about. So we're on private locations, some business parks, universities, some recreational areas. So everywhere from down in Dorset to a couple of areas in Leicestershire, up in Manchester. Even got a couple of in Belfast at the moment. Right. And so really just trying to get them out, get people to understand what they're about, see the practicality of them. And now that the government has, and the Department for Transport is moving forward with its future mobility zones. So, in amongst all the very difficult news, there was some positive news from the DFT a couple of weeks ago about moving forward with legalization and consultation on these new smaller electric vehicles, e-scooters and others. Now that they're going to move forward with that, now we're really focusing on developing the conversations we've got with a number of councils around the country about, okay, how are we going to introduce these things in a controlled fashion? As I say, doing it in a way that's going to benefit residents, not just visitors to the city. And that will all develop now over the next few months. And actually, we've got a few conversations going on at the moment of, well, how can we use these new vehicles, in fact, to help some of the key workers get around, who might, be quite wary about getting into enclosed spaces of buses or underground, or with reduced services might be finding it difficult. So we'll see how that develops. But there's good opportunity. We're in a crisis. We believe in the ability of these vehicles to do good. Yeah. And so hopefully, we can work with councils and get them doing good at, when it's most needed right now.
Yeah.
But that's where we're at. And also we've, we're using bikes at the moment, just on a small scale, but to help with some local deliveries. So helping some of the high street shops and some people who are finding it difficult to get out to high street shops. So we've got delivery services with our e-cargo bikes going in a couple of areas, and just showing how that can really be used to benefit. And a number of others are doing that, the delivery service as well with these new vehicles. So hopefully we'll be coming out of it and people really see the benefit of this kind of local transport and smaller vehicles.
It's really interesting. And somebody who lives in London, it's relatively easy to be able to relate to it, in that we've started with Santander bikes, the Boris bike, and that shared concept, and that's evolved and developed and grown. And then there's other companies that have come into the market. And so, and Zipcar you see around London, so people are presumably borrowing vehicles for a relatively short period of time. But beyond London, I suspect that people aren't really familiar with what the potential is. But it sounds to me from what you're saying, Paul, that it's going to hit other parts of the country relatively quickly on the back of the mobility zones, which are really out there, aren't they? Where are they? Southampton and one or two other areas. So they're not main cities necessarily.
Yeah, and interesting. There are a few bike schemes that are there around the country. There are a few that have kind of come and gone as well. Including some of the dockless schemes, and I'm not a believer in dockless as a model whatsoever. I just think on many levels it just doesn't work. It's got a structure, both from a council point of view. You've got to have a clean street scene. From a user point of view, you've got to know where these things are, and they've got to be reliable. And from an operator point of view, so. So some haven't seen them at all. Some have seen ones that haven't worked with the manual bikes. But I think really it's outside of London where the most exciting potential is, and particularly in the short term, because there's an even bigger gap in what's available in terms of your options, and because public transport doesn't cover as much, and it's just too easy and too tempting to get in your car for many people on these things. I think really being able to use this to have other options for your cars. The other thing is it's just a great fun way to get around, which is quite important because it means that people will choose it. But also, it then spurs some of the investment in the focus on things we're now calling bike lanes. So, a lot of cities have wanted to put in more investment into bike lanes and into infrastructure and segregated infrastructure for these smaller, lower speed vehicles. But it's always a conflict between cyclists on the extreme and cars on the other extreme. Now, I'm a cyclist myself, but the reality is not all journeys are applicable to cycling, and showing up at your meeting all sort of dripping in sweat and other things. But if you can combine that, the cycling with these smaller, lower speed and 15-mile-per-hour vehicles that are just as, from a road perspective, are just like cycling, then what it means is you've got that much more justification to put in that infrastructure, and it's accessible to everyone. Mm. And so that combination of being able to have the options for people to get out of their cars, to make those journeys in a convenient way, for more investment in that kind of infrastructure by cities. I think the potential for that and the immediate impact of that is greater outside of London than it is in such a big city at the moment.
Yeah. So we're talking about e-bikes, e-scooters, e-cargo bikes, all electrically battery operated, but also micro electric cars as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, the one thing about transport, and that's, even councils and we in the, who are in it kind of mix up all the time or don't pay enough attention to, is that it's, transport is multimodal. And depending on the type of journey you're going to make, you need a different type of vehicle. And at the moment, the problem is with your car, you're buying your car for, that one time that you're taking the whole family, or the one time you need, or the few times that you need to take a lot of carrying capacity. But most of the time, you don't need that. So what you need is, you need access to, when I want to bike, and when I want to get the exercise, and it's the right vehicle for that journey, I want access to. When I want a smaller, either e-bike or an e-scooter, for example, then I want access to that. Then if I do need a little bit more carrying capacity, either an e-cargo bike or a little micro car, if you've got access to that range, that covers the vast majority of your journeys, supplemented by public transport and getting you to the public transport, for example. And then the car clubs come in it, whereas if you need, the occasion when you need something bigger, and even up to a van for an hour or two, then that kind of completes the whole service and the complement. And all of a sudden, well, why do I need to spend thousands of pounds on a car or a van or an SUV that just sits there doing nothing most of the time and is just burning a hole in my pocket? So, all of these things are complementary. The car clubs and the bike schemes and the micromobility and public transport, to be able to give people those options to say, now I don't need to buy that car, because I can get by much better and much cheaper, in fact, on the combination of services that are coming.
And so, how as a customer, how would I pay for that? I join a network that enables me to draw down all these different services, transport.
Yeah, and so you've got to remember, we're right at the beginning of all of this, or I think kind of getting into the second phase. If we look at the first phase of being the bike schemes and the car clubs, and now we're kind of getting into the second phase of it. And I'm a bit colored with my background in telecoms, where maybe that's the way I see the world. But I think it's a great analogy, where a few years ago it used to be that you would get your landline phone from one provider, and you'd get your TV from another provider, and you'd get your broadband, and then your mobile phone. But eventually they all sort of came together, and because it's common usage and it's much easier. So at the start, it will be, there are the separate providers. One of the things we will be doing is, working with, the public transport, or working with other partners to be able to bring together kind of combined offers, so you can do that. And then I think, pretty rapidly, there's going to be consolidation within the industry, so that you'll get, a few providers that are providing the multimodal, and you'll go to them. And again, like the telecoms industry, started out as sort of pay-per usage, but then actually you start to get into a subscription-based model, where I'm paying you a monthly fee and I've got access to all of this, and maybe I get a certain level of usage, a number of hours on it, or something like that, and then it becomes much more convenient. So we won't get there, right at the start, but that is the way that it will go, and I think go, over the next, let's say within the next 5 years, it's going to change quite rapidly.
This is going to change this is going to change what cities and towns look like quite dramatically, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think for the better, because it's going to be, it's one of the I guess things coming out of the lockdown that we've got right now, is, hopefully getting everything under control and getting out of it. But then, as activity starts to pick up again, people will be looking and saying, well, they'll be seeing those air quality maps, and they'll have experienced a time when we haven't had all the pollution that we've had, and they'll be thinking, well, why do we want to go back to all of those emissions and the noise pollution and the other things? And aren't our communities much nicer when we've got cleaner transport and smaller transport and these kinds of things? So that all the technology is there to be able to do it right now. It's all about, as I say, how do you implement it? And once we start showing how it can be implemented in a way, then I think it's going to be it's going to be very disruptive, like we've had disruption in other industries, yes, where people will think, okay, kind of there, I heard about it, but oh, where did that come from? And all of a sudden it's changed much faster than they think. But as I say, for the better, and making our cities more livable and nicer, and people outside and seeing other people and then enjoying the way that they're getting around.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And you talk about the pandemic and its impact in terms of urban transport and people's desire to see less pollution, and we've already experienced that because of the pandemic, but also, and from previous conversations we've had at Downtown, we're going to see more people working from home, so that will inevitably have an impact. People will demand that because they've been able to do it during the pandemic. So we'll see a reduction in office space, surely, within towns and cities. And also retail has been accelerated in terms of moving online, which was happening anyway, but that's been accelerated by the pandemic. More of that will be delivered, as you say, through e-cargo bikes, etc., more environmentally friendly vehicles. So all that combined really changes the face of towns and cities through perhaps more residential, more leisure facilities in towns and cities, perhaps less retail, perhaps even less office space.
Yeah, and it could be, but also, what we would like to do, and what we're doing at the moment is also maybe supporting some of that, the retail and those shops on the high street who've really been struggling against the big online retailers, to say, well, actually, it's much easier for them to have a hybrid existence where they can be there, but in fact, you could get a lot more local deliveries, yes, going in an area from a shop on your high street, from some of those independents, yes, who have found it very difficult to compete so far, because you've got the vehicles and the access, and people are getting used to that right now. Some might find it difficult, but others, I mean, we're finding the local fruit and veg shop, for example, is just they can't keep up with demand, right, at the moment, and so people are getting used to getting deliveries, yeah, from the person that they like on the high street. So there will be some ways in which we could actually enhance that high street experience as well, be able to get people there, but not with all the parking and not in their cars. That doesn't push everything online, but comes to a nice complement.
Yeah, and this ties in very much with what they call smart cities, which I've been doing a little bit of research, yeah, around. And do you want to say a bit about that and how it ties together? That's all about monitoring, yeah, data and everything else, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean another part of this. I mean, everybody with smart cities is and a transport, or all the talk until now has been about big autonomous vehicles and all this kind of thing. But actually, the really interesting thing about these new powered vehicles is the batteries on them. They've got relatively big batteries. They're very intelligent vehicles at the moment. And the way that the shared ones work are they're all app controlled, locked and unlocked through your app. They've got a mobile SIM in them. They've got GPS. They've got a kind of accelerometer that where you can tell what the movement is of the vehicle. And so there's a lot of information even about the transport and the location element that you can really start to use to understand much better the journeys that are being taken, etc. We're talking to other sort of smart city sensor manufacturers, and even those we've been trying to push the autonomous vehicle companies to say, look, you've got very small trials around the country. actually the sort of sensing equipment that they've got on those autonomous vehicles fit on quite a small circuit board and can be powered by a battery on an electric scooter and others. There's a lot more sort of monitoring that could go on it, not just to be able to help, map out the traffic and understand the street scene and sort of what's out there, but even for driver assistance on these smaller vehicles. So, ultimately, if I'm a parent, for example, and I'm worried about my vulnerable child getting, going around the city on something, well, ultimately, I'm going to be able to have something where I can sort of see where they are. And that maybe vulnerable road users, if they're indicating themselves as vulnerable road users, if I detect that something's happened, a sudden stop and they haven't moved or anything from beyond that, then it might notify somebody that they've indicated, just to be able to check, are they okay? And these kind of things, or be able to assess, is there a dangerous situation coming up, or be able to direct them on routes where these are the safest and the cleanest routes to get where you're trying to go. So these even though they're small, they're it's essentially floating batteries you've got going around the city, and I think these are going to be the core of our smart cities going forward. And that's going to be another surprise that's coming up about, well, people thought it was going to be the big autonomous vehicles and others that were going to be the smart cities. I think it's actually going to be these numerous smaller vehicles that are going to be the real enablers of our smart cities going forward.
That's interesting. And just to move towards the end, but which countries should we be, or cities across the world should we be looking at? I know there's been some developments in the Middle East and United Arab Emirates where they're almost building new cities, so it's relatively easy as opposed to retrofitting some of this technology. So which countries should we be looking at to get a glimpse of what the future looks like?
Well, to be honest, I think the UK is the perfect place for all of this. Now, we're a little bit behind in terms of this micro-mobility in the UK. But it's also giving us the ability to look elsewhere and see, well, what's happened, and now, okay, learn from the mistakes and say, okay, let's do it properly, and let's build up from the ground, in a structured way, and others. Certainly in terms of just vehicles, there are a lot of European cities where there are these smaller vehicles and the kind of electric vehicles which have come. There are a number of Asian cities where the majority of mopeds going around are sort of traditional scooters, as we call them, all electric, and you can just see the real improvement, sound and emissions there. But then I think in terms of urban design and future urban design, exactly as you say, where new cities are being built in the Middle East and others, and we're also having that in the UK in terms of just new developments and new areas where the planners now need to be thinking about, we're in a world where we're used to the car and we're used to the design around the car, but actually in 5 or 10 years things could change, and if I design everything for the car, that could all be obsolete. So I do think looking at those countries, as you say, where they want to be future looking, they want to use the new technologies, and they're designing that into the urban design and into building design and building of apartments and those kinds of things, and how you integrate into that absolutely is where not only we should be looking, but I think in the UK we've got a lot of knowledge that we can be looking to export that knowledge and to be able to influence that. I don't think anybody's really got yet, from what I've seen, the kind of future urban design as far as these new vehicles and integrating them yet. So I think there's all the opportunity for that. And as I say, I think the UK is the perfect place to develop all of that ecosystem and to be demonstrating how it can work for many reasons. And as I say, it's a great opportunity for us to develop that and then to export that knowledge. But yeah, I've absolutely been working where there's looking at where there's massive new developments and how are they thinking about it.
Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on and giving us a glimpse into what is quite literally coming down the road, if you'll pardon the pun. Great insight into the future, actually, and not that far away, I don't think, at all.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much, Simon, for having me.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks.